Excellent.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see everyone. Moadim b'simcha to this Shomrei Chol HaMoed Zoom. And it's really wonderful to have Eiran back. It's crazy to think we did this Chol HaMoed Pesach as just the beginning of coronavirus lockdown and everything. We thought we can't be in Israel for Yom Tov. Many had plans to be there. For Pesach, they had already booked and had plans. I think by Sukkot, no one was that foolish to actually make plans to fly. So we thought we can't be in Israel. Let's try to at least experience Israel from the comfort of our homes here in London or wherever you are, to try to connect to Israel. It's really something so important for us, the value of Aliyah, the Regal. So we invited Eiran. If people enjoyed it, we've had you back a few other times on different special occasions throughout the summer. Poignant moments in the Jewish calendar, and they've always been really fantastic and interesting. So it's really great to have you back for Chol HaMoed Sukkot, to once again connect us to the land of Israel and to expand our horizons, both geographically but also intellectually. So without further ado, thank you everyone for joining, and handing over to you, Eiran.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be back with you again. And the topic that we decided to go with is language, nation, and land, a hidden history of the land and people of Israel. And it really allowed me, I kept it somewhat vague, and it really allowed me to expand. And question is, where do you start with something so big as that? If you're talking about language, I think that the best place to start is with two schoolboys, two Jewish or Judean schoolboys. One of them doing his homework and one of them slacking off and going to go for a swim in the middle of the school day. And this is really the beginning, and this is really where I'd like to start our entire discussion, because one of those schoolboys, we know both of their names. One of them was Aviyah or Aviyahu. Another one was Yaakov. Both very Jewish names, both very Jewish boys. And each one of them has got a very different story. And we're going to visit both of them, as well as a couple of sites in between. And we hopefully going to tie it all together. What is so special about these two Jewish schoolboys is that one of them lived 150 years ago. The other one lived 3,000 years ago. And this is where our story really begins. What you learn in school? Where does it all start? Well, you've got to learn your Aleph Bet, right? You've got to learn your ABCs. And if we're talking not just about an individual, not just teaching a single child how to read, how are you going to create writing for an entire civilization? Where are you going to start? Well, what they tell us about the evolution of the Hebrew language is that it began with pictograms, which gradually became what we know as an alphabet. Became the Aleph Bet, became a Proto-Sinaitic text form, was Proto-Sinaitic script rather, became evolved into a Proto-Canaanite script, and from there split out into its different directions, whether it's the Hebrew language, the Phoenician language, the Moabite, the Edomite language. And from the Phoenician language, of course, the script was adopted by the Greeks, from the Greeks to the Romans, and all the way into the English language, which means that if we look into English, we should be able to find the beginnings of the English language. And through that, we should be able to see a mirror holding up to the Hebrew. And, one of the ways that is kind of obvious is just the fact that we call it an alphabet. We don't use alpha and beta, but we know that the list of the letters is called an alphabet, and that is quite clearly should be somehow related to Aleph Bet. And in fact, if we go back to approximately the Middle Bronze Age, for about 4,000 years ago, when the very beginnings of writing began, we had a pictogram, a picture, and you will have to bear with my lovely drawing skills. Someone drew a thing. What's that? Any guesses? Am I that bad?
A cow.
Oh, excellent. Yes, it's a cow. Not so. Problem is that if you're trying to give across the idea of cow, do you need to have this whole thing? No, you don't. You can actually lose quite a lot of it. In fact, you can lose the entire body, and just so long as you've got the head of the cow, it's still kind of visible. You can still tell that this is in fact a cow. And as this progressed, this pictogram became simplified and simplified until instead of having to do a separate head and horns, you want to do that in as few strokes as possible, correct? So you would just do a U with a line across it, and same idea. Eventually that became more angular, it took on an angle, and what you ended up with was that. In various forms, the line, the straight line over there and the triangle drifted apart until you had that. Is that reversed for you? Great. And the other version that you got is, well, another version is that you got this triangle, that line, and you end up with an aleph. Okay, that's all very nice and all very good. But what's the significance of all that? Well, an aleph isn't just an aleph. Why? Because what is the word used in ancient, well, the ancient Hebrew word still used today for the cow that heads the pack, the alpha of the herd of cows, if you would. What do you call that bull? The aluf. So aluf becomes aleph. In Hebrew today, aluf is a general, and in the Torah itself, we see that aluf is used to describe the descendants of Esav. They are the head of each one of the families. Each one of the clans is described as an aluf. This is, generally speaking, the evolution from pictograms into letters, with eventually, rather than just giving across the idea of cow, it becomes completely disassociated. You don't have to talk about a cow. You're just using an aleph. You're just making an a sound. The same applies with a bet, which is a house. A bait eventually just becomes a b sound, which means that when you look at the Hebrew language today, you don't necessarily see that connection, but you can see that there is a clear line of as it evolves from one to the other. So why do I bring this up? Well, because what we are going to be doing is examining some inscriptions, and the ones that we are going to be looking at are not in modern Hebrew. In fact, this is very well known even to the sages of the Gemara. They write how there are two different scripts which are used, Ktav Ivrit and Ktav Ashurit, the Hebrew script and the Assyrian script. Even the Assyrian script, even that is a simplification because it wasn't actually an Assyrian script, it was an Aramaic script, which the Assyrians, a non-Semitic people, adopted as their imperial language and as their imperial way of communicating across their empire in order to allow ease of communication across various Semitic peoples. So once again, if we want to go back in time, which is what we are going to be doing today, we are going back to the first temple period prior to our exile, prior to the rise of the Assyrian empire, prior to the conquest of Judea by the Babylonians, and prior to our exile in Babylon and the adoption of the Aramaic so-called Assyrian script, we need to start by really going back to the very beginning, the script that we originally began with, the true Hebrew script. And I'm going to share screen. Dum, dum, dum. There we go. I think that we got people waiting to come in. There we go. Okay, so let us make this full screen. Present. Ta-da! Great, there we go. Over here you can see a very simple graph. It shows you each of the various letters with the aleph and their original Ivrit or their original Proto-Hebraic in academia, known as the Proto-Hebraic script. Some of them we know exactly what it is supposed to be. We've got a very strong idea about what the letters were originally in their pictographic form, and some of them we've got absolutely no idea. Hi people, welcome to. If you could mute your microphones, that would be fantastic. So For example, the yud over there, yud is a yad, a hand. It evolved into a way, in this description kind of looks like a Z or a 7 with a line across it, but it evolved that way. It originally had 5 fingers, and eventually it's you don't have to draw 5 fingers every single time you use the letter yud, and so you kind of eventually leave it out. A vav is a hook. You can actually see that hook shape is still over there, so on and so forth. So I mentioned our 2 schoolboys, and the first one that I wanted to speak about lived 3,000 years ago. He lived in a town called Gezer. Gezer, nothing to do with carrots, which are gezer in Hebrew, but to do with a border. Gezer is also a limit, and the city of Gezer was on the limits between the territory of Judah and the territory of the Philistines, which was just out towards the coast. And so we found that at Gezer, about 3,000 years ago, there was a boy who had some homework and he wrote it down. Now, what did he write it on? Well, if you write today, everything that you write, I assume, like me, 99% of what you write is digital, correct? The other 1% is on paper, right? What's the problem with that? Well, our paper, if kept in the right environment, if kept in a, very cool and dry place, if we made sure to get no acid paper, our paper may last for a bit beyond our own lifetimes. Our digital, even with our digital records, anything that we have written down digitally is not going to even last that long. We'd be lucky if it lasts as long as we do. Even forgetting encryption, but just the format itself of digitization is not friendly for preservation of writing. And there are many, for example, the original moon landings, the recordings of the original moon landings they can't access them. They've owned them, they've got them on tape, but no one actually creates the machine which creates the machine which reads the tape. So how do you write if you want to make sure that everything lasts? How can you write? Well, they didn't do it so that it would last. They just used the material that they had most common and which was easily and readily available, which was, of course, pottery. And so we find that most ancient writings, the ones that are preserved, while people definitely were writing on parchment and we're writing on papyrus, we're going to be mostly dealing with writing on pottery. Why? Because pottery is something that you could easily use, that you could pick up from anywhere. And you could think in a world in which without plastic, a world without glass or metal, pottery is everything. You can pick up a piece of pottery and write on it. And so we find that about 3,000 years ago, a boy by the name of Aviyah or Aviyahu was given some homework. He was sitting in the city of Gezer. 3,000 years ago is roughly the time of King David, or perhaps a little later, and he was given some homework. What was he told to write? Well, what is the most Jewish thing that you could possibly write? A calendar, right? You've got to know exactly what's going to happen when. Well, it's not actually a very Jewish calendar, but it is certainly a calendar which is linked to the land of Israel. Remember, we talked about the land, the culture, and it is a calendar which is linked to the life of the person, of the people who lived over there. And what we see is over here. I'm going to pull up in just a moment. I'm going to pull up a picture of that calendar. Sorry, I'm just got too many tabs open. Okay. Share screen. There we go. All right. Over here, we have got on the right side of the screen, you can see this is the calendar. And if, like me, you have got the row of faces obscuring it, try to shift that over into the middle because we are going to do something quite interesting. This is known as the Gezer calendar, and it is possibly one of the earliest discovered artifacts in Hebrew language. And you can see the letters don't look familiar. So what I've done for us is I've provided an easily accessible key for us to start to understand it. You can see at the top of the screen, I've reversed it is reversed. It is reads from left to right, while on the calendar itself, it reads in the Hebrew way from right to left. Why is that? Because 3,000 years ago, direction of text wasn't actually that important. There were various ways of writing. You could write right to left to right, round and round in circles. The most, a very popular way was plowman, what they called a plowed field, which is you write from right to left. And when you hit the end of the line, what do? You go down one and start writing left to right. So you'd end up zigzagging across the entire page. But this, in any case, the Gezer calendar that we have over here is written right to left. And if we look approximately 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 lines down, we have got a line which we are actually going to try to decipher together. And that is quite interesting and quite exciting. And how can we do that? If you can't make it out on the tablet itself, then just look at the top of the screen. The first letter, as I said, is a hand where the fingers eventually got left out. You end up with only 2 fingers, and that is, of course, a yud. Next one is a head. You could see it began as a neck with a head, eventually took on a triangle shape. That is a resh. And the next one is a chet. What word have we spelt out already? Well, if we're talking about a calendar, we are going to be talking about different months, correct? What is the Hebrew word for month? One of them is chodesh. The other one is?
Yarech.
Yarech, yeah. Yarech is a moon. Yarech is a month. So what we've already have over here is Yarech, and we can already start to figure out that, oh, this is a calendar. The next letter that we have over there is a kuf. The next one is a tzadi, the one which kind of looks like a flag with a wavy line on top, tzadi. And once again, we got a resh. Kuf tzadi resh is katsir, harvest. We're not just talking about any calendar, we're talking about an agricultural calendar. Yerech katsir, and then the next one looks like a W, is in fact, well, the W is kind of easy because it's one of the most similar ones to the way we write Hebrew now. And it is supposed to look like shein, or 2 teeth. These are teeth, which is a shin. The next one is an eye, a round eye, ayin, resh again. And this one kind of looks like waves on the sea, or possibly, is mayim, which is a mem. So what have we got? Sin, ayin, resh, mem. Seorim. Let's look at that. You can look across at the calendar itself. And you can find, it says, Yerech Katsir Seorim, the month of the harvest of barley. And so we find that the entire calendar follows the various agricultural cycles, and it breaks it down. We're not quite sure, and this is exactly the kind of thing that you would expect a child to write, which is why we're not, can't say 100% that it was a child who wrote it, well, that it was a schoolboy, but this is the kind of thing that would be a schoolboy's exercise, where he is given a list, a calendar, and told, okay, write this one out. And he did a good job. And how do I say that we know his name. His name is Avian, we know that, because he signed it at the bottom of the calendar. So we find that this is the Gezer calendar, and it is one of the first uses of the Hebrew language. Okay, great. We said that the alphabet diverged from Israelite, Canaanite, Phoenician, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, etc., etc. I think we got people waiting to come in. What happened is that not only did we see the alphabet evolve, we also found that the language itself evolved. or diverged. We found that while people originally were speaking much the same language, eventually these different versions diverged. And that leaves us with a question. When we find a very early Israelite, a very early Hebrew writing inscription, how do we know that that is Hebrew and that it is not Canaanite? How do we know that it is not Moabite or Edomite? Well, part of it is geography. If we find it on this side of the Rift Valley, this side of the Dead Sea, this side of the Jordan Valley, then it is probably either Hebrew or Canaanite, possibly Edomite. We can rule out Moabite or Ammonite. Great. That doesn't help very much, does it? What else are we looking for? Well, I can ask you another question. What else can we find out about people from their writing? Well, we can find out their agricultural calendar, sure, but we can also find out their names. We can find out a little about them. We can find out what is important to them. We can find out their values. We can find out many different things. And if we look at a name like Aviyah, what does that tell us about the person? Well, we've got hidden within the name, we have got sorry, just one moment. Yeah, hidden within the name, we have got a theophoric name, which means that this is someone who worships the God of the Jews. If we saw a different name, Baal, then we'd say, oh, there's a Canaanite name. If we saw Kmosh, we'd say Moabite. If we saw Kos as the theophoric, then we would know that we are dealing with Edomites. But if we find the name Aviyah, then that tells us already that we are dealing with something in the Hebrew context, which is why this was, for many years, since its discovery in 1908, this was considered to be the oldest Hebrew inscription. But that it can no longer claim, because just around the corner from where I sit right now, at the other side of the Elah Valley, there is an amazing, amazing site, which is called Khirbet Keyafe. And hopefully, I'm not going to be doing it justice in the framework of this particular talk, because it is really an amazing site and there's a lot to read about it. And it's one of my favorite places to visit. But nevertheless, I'm just going to talk very briefly about some of the things that were found over there. Firstly, this is a site which is considered by some it is dated to the time of King David or thereabouts. Exactly which king is a question, but it's a bit of a thorny issue, because it is one of the earliest sites which you could claim to be created by a united monarchy, which already tells us we're moving from the period of the judges, Shoftim, into the time of the kings, Malachim. What you can see in the picture over here, you can see that in the background, there is the valley of the Elah Valley, and off to the left, just beyond the picture frame, is where I'm sitting right now. But what we have over here is a beautiful site, which was actually discovered by accident by a ranger who was driving through the nature, making sure that there was looking out for antiquities theft, when he noticed that a site which had been assumed to be a Byzantine farmhouse had much, much bigger stones than it should have, that someone had put a lot of effort into building something. And he called up Yossi Garfinkel of the Antiquities Authority, conducted a dig over here. What they found is an encampment, a fortified encampment. It existed for only about a generation or so. And it is unique. Well, one of the unique things about it is that it's got two different entrances, both facing the Elah Valley, which kind of curves around it. One of them facing Socho, one of them facing Azekah, which are the two towns which are mentioned, or the two sites which are mentioned in the story of David and Goliath. In addition, we found that another place mentions there being a city in the area called Sha'arayim. What does Sha'arayim mean? 2 gates. Sha'ar is a gate, Sha'araim is 2 gates. So it is one possibility is that this is the biblical site of Sha'araim, that this could have been the camp of Saul between Sukkot and Azekah when the Israelites faced down the Philistines. In any case, what was a couple of things that were interesting about it. I said we're mostly dealing with inscriptions. So that aside, one of the really amazing inscriptions that was found over there was this jar was found. And if you look at the top near the neck of the jar, you can see that there are some letters. Let's take a bit of a closer look. Over here, using what we have had so far, what we have already discussed, the letters that we've already learned, we can already start to understand them. The one which is shaped like a W, it's been put on its side this time, is a shin, right? The one to the right of that is an aleph again. Aleph, shin. The next one is a bet. Ayin, an eye, you can see with a pupil. Ishba'a, the next one is a loop, a lamed. Again, another bet, a nun. And finally, then yet another bet, a dalad, a triangle over there. And finally, on the far left, another circle with a dot, which is an ayin. Ishba'al ben Beda is what it says. Now that's very interesting because guess what? We've already encountered the name Ishba'al. Ishba'al is actually a figure who appears in the Tanakh. Well, he appears in 2 different names, because if you look in this book of Shmuel, the book of Samuel, rather, if you look in the book of Chronicles, his name is Ishba'al, the son of Shaul. He was the son of the king. This is not the son of Bela, so not the same person. I'm not saying that this was owned by the son of King Saul. But what we find is that in the book of Samuel, his name is different. It's not given as Ishba'al, a man of Baal, but as Ishboshet, man of shame. And what we find is that throughout the Tanakh, the name Baal, when it at times when it became unacceptable for use in Jewish circles as a theophoric name, to use the name of Baal, the god of the Canaanites, what was substituted? Instead of saying Baal, it was just changed to Boshet. So what we find over here is that, okay, this also doesn't answer our question whether this is an Israelite, a Hebrew rather, or a Canaanite encampment, and the debate rages on. However, there was something else which was discovered. In addition to all the other finds, they've also been, they found some altars, they found standing stones, they found hopefully ongoing archaeological digs really are finding some very interesting things at Khirbet Kayafe / Sha'araim. But the other thing which was found was this. Excuse me. This one is an inscription, and I'm not going to try to read it. You're welcome to, because it is still being fought over, and there are still many disagreements about what exactly it says. It's actually ridiculous how different the interpretations are. But one interpretation that has gained quite a lot of ground says that this reads the text as saying, "You shall not do unto something, something, widows, something, 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 orphans, something, judges." It's talking about judges, orphans, and widows. I asked, and I'm going to keep on asking, what can we learn from inscriptions? What can we learn from what people have written and left behind? Well, what we can learn is something about their value system. We can learn something about their morals. And if we're finding something which is standing up for justice, if we find something that is standing up for the underprivileged, if we find something that is standing up for orphans and for widows in a way that is familiar to us from the Torah, we can start to figure out that there is something familiar in this cultural context. In addition, the word that it uses for you shall not do unto, it uses the word al-ta'as. Why is that significant? Because when we find that split between Canaanite and Phoenician and Moabite, Ammonite, and Hebrew, each one had its own word for action, an active verb. And the only one which used the verb la'asot, to do, is Hebrew, which is why I say that this can be seen as having taken the crowd from Gezer. The Khirbet Keyafa Ostracon over here claims now to be the earliest known, well, so far discovered Hebrew writing from roughly the time of King Saul. Now, why is this? I mentioned the word Ostracon, just a brief aside. One of my favorite stories is democracy. The Greeks famously invented democracy, but they didn't just have a way to vote for people, they had a way of voting against people. If you wanted someone gone, if you the least liked or least popular politician within a town, you could vote for them. You would write their name onto a little piece of pottery, and you would put it into a ballot box. And when the elections were over, they would count all the ballots, and they wouldn't just count to see who had won the election, they'd count to see who had lost. Why? Because anyone who got the most names in the expel this person ballot box would actually be thrown out of the city, would be banished from the city for a year. Why? Like it says, this sounds like it is folk etymology, but people, this is serious. What word do we gain from that? Well, if you're writing that name on an ostracon, then what are you going to do to the person who gets the most ostraca? You're going to ostracize them. Yeah. The word ostracize comes from a small piece of pottery with writing on it. So I just love that. Love that little and
you kill it.
Beg your pardon? Sometimes I wonder if modern democracy could learn a thing or two from that. I mean, I'm sure we've all got one or two people who we'd like to vote out of the country for a bit. That aside, okay. So we've got what we've covered so far is a couple of some of the earliest writing. Okay, we've covered some of the theophorics. We've spoken about how although the Baal was a Canaanite god, how it was used as a Jewish name, and how Aviyah was itself a Jewish name, how those tell us something about the people. What else can we learn? I said, this is some of the hidden history of the land and of the Jewish people. And one of the places we need to go is all the way to the north, because right at the northern edge of modern Israel's borders was also the most ancient was the most northern border of ancient Israel as well. By the foot of the Mount Hermon, there's a place called Dan. In fact, one of the etymologies of the name Yarden, Jordan, is that Yared Midan, that it's the river that goes down from Dan. This is the source of the Jordan River. In any case, there is a tell called Tel Dan, and found in secondary use, which means someone had, in antiquity, someone had taken an inscription, had bashed it to pieces, and had used it as building blocks. Nevertheless, archaeological dig uncovered a couple of pieces of writing, which I want to share with you now. What we have over here is, this is called the Tel Dan inscription, and you can see the language, the alphabet looks the same, right? We can tell where the aleph and the bets and the shins are. We are starting, hopefully, to learn how to read Proto-Hebraic script. However, this one is not Hebrew, sorry. This one is Aramaic. Not Aramaic as in, the Aramaic of the Gomorrah, but Aramaic as in the language of the Arameans. This is, in fact, a inscription of an Aramaean, possibly King Hazael, declaring victory over Israel, over the Jews. And you can see over there, this one is currently on display in the Israel Museum. And you can see that there are a couple of letters over there which are filled in with white. You see them? Some they've rubbed some chalk in, which itself is a bit problematic, but let's have a closer look. Let's zoom in. Once again, we are reading from right to left, and yes, it does need to be said. Over there, we have got first one. Bet is a bite, a house. This one we should know already because we've encountered it before. Yud. The X is a taf. A tav or a mark is an X. X marks a spot. And then we've got the triangle. We saw it before. Daled. This one is a vav. And what's the last one? Once again, a daled. What do we have written over here? Beit David, the house of David. This inscription is the first, we spoke about the first Hebrew inscription. This is the first mention that we have possibly of the house of David. In fact, it is really, so it is, however, while most archaeologists agree that this is in fact a mention of the house of David, there are some who disagree and who think that this is something else. And sometimes they've got to bend over backwards just to find a plausible explanation. And there is something something that's going on in Israel at the moment is there is a TV show called HaYehudim Ba'im, the Jews are coming. And they've got they're very controversial at the moment, especially because they sometimes poke fun at topics from the Tanakh. But in this particular clip that I want to play you, they're not poking fun at the Tanakh itself, they're poking fun at the archaeologists who will bend over backwards to say that something is not from the Tanakh, that it doesn't prove the Tanakh. And I'm going to I'll try to speak over the video just I don't find one with English subtitles, so I'll try to speak over it. If you can follow in Hebrew, great, it's got Hebrew subtitles. If not, it's fairly self-explanatory what the video is about, because it is about two archaeologists who find an inscription bearing the words, what? Beit David. I don't believe it. Do you know what this means? This is the greatest archaeological find of our times. No, it proves everything. It proves that the house of David existed. What? Did you say David? David, the the unified kingdom, monarchy, the Beit HaMikdash. It proves Beit HaDud, the house of the Dud. What? What on earth are you talking about? Oh, just come with me. Where did you bring me? For those of you who are not quite getting it, the movie The Big Lebowski, focuses on the dude, who's Lebowski, refers to everyone as dude, dresses like that, bowls like that. This is proof not of the house of David, but of the house of the dude. They said that the lazy will always lose out. But that's just their opinion or something. We found the proof that ties the whole room together. This is, that's really a funny movie. But in any case, it is an even funnier clip, because actually that within that, it's ridiculous, but well, I don't, there are some who claim that it's not talking about Beit David, it's talking about Beit Dod, the house of my uncle, which means, which would mean Hazael says, I defeated the king of Israel and my uncle. No, it's quite clear if he's talking about two kingdoms that he defeated, one of them being Israel, the second one would be Judah or the house of David. Nevertheless, it's just ties the whole room together. That being said, we're going to be moving on from there. Just trying to keep an eye on the time. My goodness, it tends to get away from us. From over here, we've got proof, or hopefully we got proof of the house of David itself. But what was found over here, Dr. Elak Mazar discovered, let's share. This is a seal, a bulla or a seal, which is fascinating because it's over there. We can see that once again, we've got a loop, a lamed, a loop, chet. And I'm not going to go through every single letter again this time, but this is Lechizkiyahu. This is the actual seal of King Hezekiah, one of the possibly second greatest king of all of Yehuda. What we are finding is that inscriptions can tell us about ordinary people, can tell us about the schoolboys, it can tell us about the sweep of kingdoms, and it can also tell us about kings themselves. Now, I mean, we should hope that that's a fact because, if Chizkiyahu HaMelech existed, that he should have left behind inscriptions. Correct? Correct. What we found over there is also just his royal inscription was a sun with wings attached to it and an Egyptian ankh, which itself is fascinating and merits further discussion. Another thing that King Hezekiah did, Chizkiyahu HaMelech, sorry, he was faced with an invasion by the Assyrians during his reign. And in order to prevent the Assyrians from taking the city of Jerusalem, he created a tunnel, drawing the water. I'm giving across in a minute or so what is usually for me an hour and a half guiding through the grounds of the city of David. So trust me, we are missing a lot of detail, but we are not really focused on, we are trying to focus on the inscriptions at least, but he created a tunnel. And that from the spring, which is over there on the right-hand side, all the way to a pool, the Shiloach, Siloam pool, which is where the water was used within the city limits. Now, why is this significant? Because I mentioned earlier about a different schoolboy. I mentioned a schoolboy who was slacking off, a schoolboy who rather than spending his time in class went off and went exploring. And on a hot summer's day, this schoolboy called Yaakov went to this pool. This is the Shiloach pool, or at least its most recent incarnation. And he noticed, well, it was well known that the water came from the tunnel, but he did something which no one else had ever done. He walked into the tunnel with a torch. And what he found was that about 10, 20 meters in, there was actually something written on the wall. And what was that? Well, it was taken to Istanbul. It's not in Israel anymore. It's in the Antiquities Museum in Istanbul. But there we have it. We can see the Hebrew letters once again. This is known as the Siloam inscription. It is a description of the people underneath the ground, quarrying that tunnel for King Hezekiah, presumably for King Hezekiah, the inscription which ties the whole room together, ties the whole story together. Other things that we find over here, this is just shows us, it describes the two different teams working from two different directions under 100 amot underneath the ground, 100 meters under the ground, and how they could hear the other tapping the other, chiseling at the rock, how they finally broke through and they saw the light shining through. It's fantastic. It's really an amazing, if not proof, it's just an amazing insight into the world of King Chizkiyahu 2,700 years ago, and at the time of the Assyrian conquest. Excuse me. Another thing that we find, also excavations in the same area have found many different bulla or seals, These are made out of, these are soft clay, which was used to seal a scroll. Rather, as we think of seals using wax, you seal something with wax. They used to use clay. And as such, each inscription has got the name of the person who sealed that envelope. And what we found up here is the names of two people. One's Gedalia ben Pashhur, and one is Yehuchal ben Shlemiah. Why is that significant? Because when Jeremiah, this is about 120 years after the time of King Hezekiah, when he was thrown into a cistern for daring to criticize the king, daring to criticize the king's management of a Babylonian invasion. These are two of the officers who did that. And what we found in the Ophel, in the part of the archaeological dig just outside the city of David, was these names of these people. Now, next, very briefly, this in 1979, I had the privilege of studying archaeology under Professor Dr. Gabi Barkai. And in 1979, Gabi was excavating the spot that we see over here. It's a short distance from my home in Jerusalem. If you've been to the old train station, Tachana Rishona, it's also like a 10-minute walk from the King Solomon Hotel. It's really centrally located inside Jerusalem. There is a site which is chiseled away, and this is actually partially destroyed. It used to be a burial site. And in 1979, Dr. Gabi Barkai, while digging over there, turned out there was an unlooted cave which was discovered. While most burial caves in the area had been looted in antiquity, an unlooted cave was accidentally discovered by a young boy, a third school boy actually, I should have thought of that. The third school boy who was a volunteer with the dig, he found an unlooted cave underneath a rock fall. And during the next couple of days, they turned up a massive amount of artifacts, which required years of research. About 7 years later, two small pieces that size that kind of looked like the way Gabi Barkai describes them, they looked like cigarette butts, small black rolled up things that were actually unrolled, and an inscription. We've discussed inscriptions in pottery, in wet clay, in stone. And what we have over here is something unique. This is an inscription in silver. And what it reads is, Yevarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. May Hashem bless you and guard you. The priestly blessing, Birkat Kohanim, which said only during the festivals of the three regalim and outside of the land of Israel. The land of Israel, it is said daily, but it's really just amazing to find this. It is from the time of King Chizkiyahu. There was someone took a small piece of silver and etched into it the words of the bracha, the words of the blessing, as an amulet, as a jewelry, however you'd like to use such a thing. Now, what we're going to move on to is a couple of last things, because we've dealt with kings, we've dealt with prophets, we've dealt with Kohanim, with priests, we've dealt with schoolboys, and one last thing that I want to deal with are soldiers. A couple of different sites in Israel. One of them is just south of where I am now, a place called Lachish. Excavation over there in the gatehouse of Lachish turned up over here. Let's just have a look. Once again, this is a picture of the city of Lachish, which was the second greatest city of the kingdom of Judah. It was attacked. We spoke about the Assyrians during the time of King Hezekiah, during the time of King Hezekiah, it was attacked by the Assyrians. When I found myself in London, I love to go to the British Museum. And if you go walk in, and where everyone is gathered around the Rosetta Stone, you just walk straight past it, left, and another left. You'll find yourself in a small room, very few visitors, which is really incredible. That is the Lachish reliefs, which is shows the defeat of the city of Lachish, taken from the palace of Nimrod in Assyria. And this is what we see over here. We see Jews of Judea being taken into exile in the top. we see Assyrian soldiers marching them away from their land. In the background, we can see palm trees. We can see grapevines. We can see the various trees and plants, their fig trees of the land of Israel. Nevertheless, after that, the city of Lachish was rebuilt and finally destroyed again during the time of the Babylonians, about 120 years later. And during the dig, what was uncovered were a bunch of different letters. They're known as the Lachish letters, but they are ostraka, written by someone else at a different location, possibly in Maresha, which we've already visited as part of our series, possibly written elsewhere. They are written by a captain who is writing to someone at Lachish. And this is one of them. This is letter number 3. They're all from the same dish, which means they're all written by the same person, using the same handwriting, using pieces of pottery taken from the same broken dish. And they are all messages from one army base, from one army encampment to another. And the names, once again, we can see the theophoric names. Your servant Hoshea sent to inform my lord, Yehush. May Hashem cause my lord to hear tidings of peace and tidings of good. A couple of things that we will see over here. Inasmuch as my lord said, don't you know how to read a letter? As such a bliss, if anyone has ever had to read me a letter, it's very outraged, very upset. How could you think that I'm illiterate? What does that tell us about the culture? What does that tell us about the people? Tell us that this is a literate society. What's also interesting is that the commander of the army, Chonyahu ben El-Natan, Chonyahu, the son of El-Natan, has gone down to Egypt. Something it goes on. Exactly what this means when it says, bring word from the prophet saying, be on guard. This is the time of Yirmiyahu, the time of Jeremiah. And while scholars just have yet to reach a consensus, some say that the prophet referred to over here might have been Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah himself. In fact, what we find in the Sefer Yirmiyahu, book of Jeremiah, chapter 26, it talks about another prophet. There was a man prophesying the name of the Lord, Uriah, ben of Shemaiah of Kiryat Yarim, which is today Telstone, who prophesied against the city and its land the same things as Jeremiah. And look at the names. And the third verse, King Jehoiakim sent men to Egypt. Who did he send? El-Natan ben Achbor, and men with him to Egypt. This possibly the El-Natan ben Achbor, the father of the previously mentioned Chonyahu ben El-Natan. Just fascinating to see the names and to see the people repeated again. Final place, well, one of the last two that I want to mention is this. Even further south, if we go beyond the Shvela, the lowlands, the relatively fertile land, down into the desert, there's a fortress called Arad, which itself deserves several hours of expression of what's going on there. The altars, for example, they recently did a study of the residue found on an incense altar from 2,600 years ago in the city of Arad, the fortress of Arad that we see over here. And what they found was that what were the people burning? Any guesses on an incense altar? Marijuana. Yeah, marijuana was being burnt on an incense altar in the land of Israel in the time of the kingdom of Judah 2,600 years ago. And just sharing that without any further comment.
They were the high priests.
Ha! Very nice. Yeah. They also built another mizbeach which follows the rule. No, I can't. They built a mizbeach which followed the rules of a mizbeach as described in the Torah, but at the same time, it was not in Jerusalem. It was not in Jerusalem, and which was then taken apart. It was dismantled. It was incorporated into the walls of the city. It's just a fascinating place, and I hope that you'd join me in a visit to it on another occasion, hopefully in person, and not just on Zoom. In any case, what we found over there is, why I wanted to mention this is because they did a study. There have been 90 letters found over there. Most of them deal with logistics. Send this to that. People doing a patrol over here, looking out for the Babylonians. Pass on. Make sure that they've got enough grain, that they've got enough wine, etc., etc., etc. which itself is interesting. It tells us exactly what's going on inside the military. But a recent study using computer algorithms and using a handwriting expert discovered that of the 18 writings sampled, there were 12 different writers. Why is that significant? Well, do you remember the outrage of Hoshayahu to Yehush? And he says, how dare you say that I can't read? We are dealing with a society where literacy is very, very prevalent. We're not talking about the center of the country. We're not talking about Jerusalem. We're not even talking about a main warehouse. We're talking about an isolated fortress on a hilltop in the middle of the Negev desert, where you have got multiple people, multiple officers in the army, each of whom is capable of reading and writing. In ancient times, this is not something you can take for granted. And it's no mistake that they call us, the people of the book, that Jews have always put a premium on teaching their children how to read. And so we just want to finish off with one last writing. I'd like to skip forward because while we've hopefully learned to read a bit of Proto-Hebraic writing, it is not in use very much, except in a couple of places. Firstly, in later time periods when Jews wanted to draw a connection with ancient times, when even during the Second Temple period, after the destruction of the Second Temple period, when Jews wanted to say, we have got continuity over here, they didn't write things using Ketav Ashurit, the square script of today. What script did they choose? They chose to use the ancient script. And what we have over here is, this one is very difficult to read, but this is written by one such person, because after the destruction of the temple, we found that during the Bar Kokhba revolt, and we've spoken about the Bar Kokhba revolt before as well, during the revolt of Bar Kokhba about in the 130s of the Common Era, Bar Kokhba up in the mountains of Judah was communicating with his officers in the area down below. And this in a place called Nachal Chever, which is a canyon running down towards the Dead Sea. They discovered a trove of writing. I mentioned the different types of things we can write on. Well, guess what? If you are in the Dead Sea region, if you're in the Judean desert, you don't need to write on pottery for it to be preserved. It's so dry that if you leave something in a cave for 2,000 years, it will be legible, even if it's written on parchment, or in this case, papyrus. And this is, of course, also the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But this, the Nachal Chever library, or they call it the Cave of the Letters that they found over here, has got a bunch of letters written by Shimon Bar Kokhba, or written for Shimon Bar Kokhba, the head of the revolt against the Romans. And the one letter in particular that I wanted to focus on is this, because this letter is written not to the regular people. This is not written to the, so this is not written to the suppliers who Shimon Bar Kokhba normally deals with. This is written to someone else. This is written to Yehuda bar Menashe, rather than Yonatan and Masabala, who are the ones who Bar Kokhba usually writes to. This is written to Yehuda ben Menashe, and it's a very interesting letter, because it says he's giving very strict and specific instructions to Yehuda ben Menashe about what he is supposed to do. Remember, before we saw during the first temple period, we had the letters about grain and wine being sent from one place to another. This is also a supply letter. But what does Shimon Bar Kokhba want supplied from the area down below, from the hot and fertile country of palm trees and of spices and citrus fruits down in the Dead Sea Valley? He's asking to be sent to him lulavim and etrogim. That is what is written over here. Shimon Bar Kokhba writing to Yehuda ben Menashe and we're able to read it, we're able to understand it. Like I said, it requires a bit more care and attention to the letters than others, but we can understand. Even I was just talking about it, the phrasing, the words that Shimon Bar Kochba uses very often could pass for modern Hebrew. Just the slang, it almost reads like modern Hebrew slang. Sometimes some of the threats that he makes, some of the comparisons that he makes, the abbreviations, it's really very, very accessible Hebrew. And what does he think is most important? Despite being surrounded by the Romans, despite facing their imminent destruction, that the people have enough arba minim, that people have enough lulabim and etrogim. And in fact, one last thing, over here we have got a coin which was filed down by Kochba and was reminted with words on it. And let's look one last time, we can read. Look over here, we've got the Beit HaMikdash, we've got the Kruvim, the Aaron and the Kruvim, the cherubs right in the middle of it. On the porch of the Beit HaMikdash, in the roof above the Beit HaMikdash door, there's a star. And around those, we have got the words Shin, Mem on one side, Ayin, Vav, Nun, Shimon. We can read the name of Shimon Bar Kochba. And on the other side, we've got Lecherut Yerushalayim, for the freedom of Jerusalem. And what do we have on the reverse? It doesn't just say Lecherut Yerushalayim, it's got two things. It's got a lulav, and we can see the hadassim and aravot bundled around it, and over there we have got an etrog. And with this we shall end. This is something which every Jewish schoolboy, whether from 3,000 years ago, from the time of King David, whether from the time of from the 1880s, or from today, every Jewish schoolboy can recognize and know what this is. And hopefully enjoy that. May we merit to see the Beit HaMikdash rebuilt. May we merit to bring the lulav and etrog in Yerushalayim.
Thank you so much, Eiran. I don't know if you have a few minutes for questions, if anyone has a question.
Eiran, it's a fantastic talk. Really interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Really such a pleasure to be here.
When do you first start to see the letters written as we currently recognize as the Hebrew alphabet?
So that I can't tell you the exact inscription, but it coincides with the return from Babylon.
Ezra and Nehemiah.
Ezra and Nehemiah, yeah. Ezra and Nehemiah, we already start to see it. Not quite the way we do, but it's definitely evident. If you look at what's really interesting, though, is within the Dead Sea Scrolls, you sometimes find that they switch, that the name of Hashem is written in the old letters. There's always an attempt, or there's always a desire to show connection to the ancient by using the old letters as opposed to the new.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? More questions? Well,
Okay, thank you so much, Eiran. Really was a fantastic talk.
fascinating.
And we are looking forward to having you back.
Please
God,
God.
we'll be able to do one Shomri in person at some point. But till then,
Looking forward. Hope so. Thank you so much. Really such a pleasure.